Hey there, fellow deep divers. Before we get started, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to the channel and tap that notification bell, so you don't miss out on any future dives. Today, we're taking a deep dive into the fascinating world of India-Israel relations. Now, whether you're a UPSC aspirant prepping for GS2, or you're a student of diplomacy, or maybe you're just someone who wants to understand those global dynamics a bit better, well, this deep dive is definitely for you.
Yeah, it's a relationship that's really evolved over the years. It's kind of intriguing. India recognized Israel way back in 1950, but full diplomatic ties weren't actually established until 1992.
Wow, that's a gap of over 4 decades. What was going on that caused that kind of delay? And, I've been reading about this, and the term dehyphenation keeps popping up. What's that all about?
Oh, that's a really key shift, and it signals a more independent, approach by India. It basically means that India is moving away from viewing this relationship with Israel solely through the lens of the Israel-Palestine conflict. To really understand this evolution, though, I think we need to rewind a bit, go back to the beginning.
Okay, let's time travel. India just got its independence. What were the factors that initially prevented closer ties with Israel?
Well, it's a bunch of different factors all kind of intertwined. It was a pretty complex situation back then. You have the legacy of India's freedom struggle, of course, and Mahatma Gandhi's perspective on a Jewish state being created. That definitely had an impact. And there were concerns, too, about how India's large Muslim population might react.
Right, and then you have the Cold War happening at the same time.
hmm
India had its non-aligned stance, having to walk this tightrope between the U.S. and the Soviet Union.
Yeah, exactly. And then if you add to that those regional dynamics, India really needed strong ties with those Arab nations, especially for support on the Kashmir issue. All of that kind of led to a pro-Arab and therefore a pro-Palestinian foreign policy for those first 4 decades.
Okay, makes sense. But then in the 1990s, things started to shift, right? Was it just the end of the Cold War, or were there other things that prompted India to rethink its approach?
Well, the collapse of the Soviet Union, yeah, it definitely reshaped the global landscape, no question. But there were other important events, too, that I think contributed to the change. One major turning point was the Madrid peace process back in 1991.
Right, right. That attempt to restart those Israeli-Palestinian peace talks. Yeah, that makes sense. If both sides were at least willing to come to the table, it signaled, a potential opening for India to kind of reconsider its position.
Exactly. Plus, there was a growing sentiment in India at the time that its pro-Arab stance wasn't really being reciprocated. The Arab world hadn't really provided much backing on crucial issues for India, like Kashmir, for example. And sometimes they even sided with Pakistan, using platforms like the Organization of Islamic Cooperation to do that.
So you have these global shifts happening, and then some regional disappointments as well. That kind of nudged India to take a fresh look at things.
Yes, and that fresh look led to the realization that India could definitely maintain its existing relationship with Palestine, while at the same time building a stronger one with Israel. This is really where that dehyphenation idea comes in. It's about recognizing a more nuanced reality, I think.
So dehyphenation means that India-Israel relations they're judged on their own merits,
Yeah.
separate from India's relationship with Palestine. It's like they're two separate threads, you know.
You got it. It gives India a lot more flexibility in pursuing its own national interests. It opens up all these doors for cooperation in all different sectors. Think of it as a strategic recalibration.
Interesting. I mean, other countries have managed to maintain relationships with both Palestine and Israel, like Jordan, for instance. It shows that it is possible.
It is, yeah. Dehyphenation gives India more diplomatic room to maneuver, you could say, and it enables them to engage strategically with Israel, even with all the complexities of that Israel-Palestine conflict.
This shift towards dehyphenation, it's definitely unlocked a whole new dimension. In the relationship between these two countries, can we dig into some of those main areas of cooperation now? I know that defense is a big one, especially with, UPSC exams focusing on this kind of stuff.
Yeah, you're right. Defense cooperation is huge. India has become a major buyer of Israeli armaments. There are these regular exchanges between their armed forces, and they've even set up a joint working group specifically on counterterrorism. It's a really vital partnership in a region, of course, that faces a whole bunch of security challenges.
And it's not just about the military hardware, right? I understand there's some collaboration in agriculture, too, which is something that directly affects millions of people in India.
Absolutely. Israel is known for its expertise in drip irrigation and water management, which is incredibly valuable for a country like India. They've
Yeah.
actually set up these centers of excellence across different parts of India to share that knowledge, and it's directly impacting things like food security and agricultural
Now,
practices.
this is where I get really interested. This collaboration goes beyond just the traditional areas,
Hmm.
like defense and agriculture. I've read about joint ventures in science and technology, specifically in fields like IT and biotechnology, and even in things like the Clean Ganga mission.
Yeah, you're on the right track. There's this strong synergy between the two countries in terms of innovation and technological development. Like, for example, the I4RD Fund, which stands for the India-Israel Industrial R&D and Technological Innovation Fund. It actively encourages joint research and development projects
Yeah.
to foster collaboration between Indian and Israeli companies. It's about fostering innovation together.
Okay, that's really helpful to actually know what that acronym stands for. And economically speaking, how important is this relationship for both India and Israel?
Well, bilateral trade between India and Israel has already crossed the $5 billion mark. Diamonds are a big part of that, of course. But we're also seeing diversification into sectors like pharmaceuticals and IT and even homeland security. There's a lot of potential there for future growth. It's a win-win situation for both countries, I think.
It's amazing to see how multifaceted this partnership has become. But of course, we can't ignore the elephant in the room, the Israel-Palestine conflict. How does India handle this very sensitive issue, while at the same time it's strengthening ties with Israel?
Well, India has consistently advocated for a two-state solution based on, UN resolutions and the historical context. But some of its recent voting patterns at the UN have definitely raised some eyebrows.
Yeah, you're talking about India abstaining from that resolution concerning the Gaza Strip, right?
Yeah,
That sparked a lot of debate.
it did, yeah. While India did clarify its commitment to Palestinian statehood, that abstention was kind of interpreted by some as maybe a shift in its stance. It really highlights this delicate balancing act that India has to maintain as it deepens its relationship with Israel.
So navigating the complexities of the Middle East, it's a constant challenge, isn't it? It's like walking a tightrope on that global stage.
It definitely is. There are other challenges too, for instance, balancing ties with Iran. Given its own, strained relationship with Israel, that's a tough one. And then there are the ongoing negotiations for a free trade agreement or FTA, which have kind of hit a few roadblocks.
Okay, so it's not always smooth sailing. But even with those challenges, this India-Israel relationship seems to be flourishing. There's this sense of real momentum, right?
Yeah, there definitely is. Both countries recognize the strategic and economic benefits of this partnership. It's a dynamic relationship, no question. And I think it'll be interesting to see how it unfolds, in the coming years.
It is fascinating to see how this relationship has evolved from, hesitation to this really robust engagement. It really highlights how global and regional dynamics shape these diplomatic ties, doesn't
It
it?
does, and it underscores India's determination to really prioritize its national interests and maintain that strategic autonomy in its foreign policy.
Mm.
It's about making choices that align with India's goals.
Welcome back to our deep dive on India's Israel relations. Before the break, we were talking about all the different areas where these two countries are working together. Now let's maybe shift gears a bit and talk about some of the challenges that this relationship faces. These aren't just like diplomatic hurdles, but they're also, I think, really key areas of discussion, especially for anyone who's, really into international relations.
Yeah, you mentioned Iran earlier, and it's pretty obvious that Israel and Iran don't exactly have the best relationship. So how does India, with its own historical ties with Iran, how does it manage this whole situation? I mean, it seems pretty tricky, especially with everything else going on in the world right now. It is. It's definitely a delicate balancing act. India values its relationship with Iran for a number of reasons, including energy security. A lot of India's oil comes from Iran.
Right, and then there's that strategic importance of the Chabahar port. It gives India a way to get to Afghanistan and Central Asia without having to go through Pakistan.
Exactly. So while India is strengthening ties with Israel, it also wants to make sure it doesn't damage its relationship with Iran. And this sometimes puts it at odds with, what Israel wants in the region. It's this constant push and pull.
Yeah, a real geopolitical puzzle. And then you've got the whole Arab world to consider, too. Israel's relationship with many Arab countries, well, let's just say it's been complicated. So how does India's growing closeness to Israel affect that? Does it create any friction?
Well, India's worked really hard to build strong ties with all sorts of different Arab countries over the years. It's a major economic partner for a lot of them. And it plays a pretty important role in keeping things stable in the region. So, yeah, India has to be careful. It doesn't want to alienate its Arab partners. It's all about maintaining that balance.
Remember when India voted at the UN
Hmm.
against America's stance on Jerusalem? That was a pretty clear message, wasn't it? That India wasn't going to just abandon its traditional positions in the Middle East. Even as it was getting closer to Israel, it showed a certain level of independence.
Absolutely. And speaking of these delicate balancing acts, we can't forget about China, right? China's this huge force in global geopolitics, and it has its own kind of complicated relationships with both India and Israel.
Yeah, it's a pretty tangled web, isn't it? India and China have that ongoing border dispute,
Yeah.
and they're increasingly seen as rivals on the world stage. But then, at the same time, Israel sees China as a really important economic partner.
It is. It's almost a paradox. China's actually Israel's biggest trading partner in Asia, and they have these really strong ties in technology and investment. So that adds another layer of complexity for India, doesn't it, as it tries to figure out how to handle its relationship with Israel. It's all about managing all these different relationships at the same time.
Sounds like India's got a lot of diplomatic balls in the air.
Hmm.
And then there were those challenges within the India-Israel relationship itself, too. We touched on the free trade agreement negotiations earlier. What are the main sticking points there? Why haven't they been able to finalize that deal yet?
Well, the FTA has been under negotiation for a while now, but some Indian industries have been worried about what it might mean for businesses in India.
Right, so it's about finding that balance between opening up trade and protecting local industries. That's a pretty classic problem with trade deals, isn't it?
It is, yeah. And then there's the whole question of technology transfer. India is really keen to get its hands on some of those advanced Israeli technologies, but they don't always agree on the terms, like how those transfers should happen.
Yeah, there are all those issues around intellectual property rights and end-user agreements,
Yeah.
and making sure the technology is used in a way that benefits both countries.
Exactly. And we also can't ignore the concerns about some of Israel's domestic policies, particularly those relating to how minorities are treated. It's something that India, with its own diverse population, is naturally quite sensitive to.
I think it's important to remember that while the India-Israel relationship is doing well, it's not without its challenges. These are complicated issues that need, careful consideration and a nuanced approach.
Absolutely. Diplomacy is all about managing these competing interests and finding some kind of common ground. It's this ongoing process of negotiation and understanding.
Okay, so we've explored the complexities and some of the challenges, which is really important, for anyone studying international relations or prepping for those exams. But what about the future of this relationship? Where do we go from here? What are the areas that hold the most promise?
Well, despite all those challenges, I think the future of India-Israel relations looks pretty bright, actually. They've built this strong foundation, based on shared interests. And there's a growing understanding of how this partnership can benefit both countries. I think we'll see even more cooperation in areas like space technology and cybersecurity and renewable energy, for example. These are all cutting-edge fields with huge potential.
I've heard that Israel is a real leader in cybersecurity, and India is putting more and more effort into boosting its own capabilities in that area. Seems like a pretty natural fit for collaboration, right? Especially with the whole world facing these increasing cyber threats.
It is, yeah. Both countries are dealing with similar threats, from terrorism and cyber attacks. So it made sense for them to work together to try and make themselves safer.
What about space technology? India's done some pretty impressive stuff with its space program lately.
It has, yeah. India has definitely become a major player in space exploration, and Israel has a fantastic reputation in satellite technology and space research. So I think there's tons of potential for them to team up on projects and share knowledge in that area.
And with all the focus on climate change these days and sustainable development, I bet there's room for them to work together on renewable energy, too.
Oh, absolutely. Israel's made a lot of progress in developing solar and wind energy technologies, and India is really trying to move away from relying so heavily on fossil fuels. So it's a win-win for both countries and for the planet, of course.
It seems like there's so many areas where India and Israel can work together,
Yeah.
and both benefit from it.
There are, yeah. And as the global landscape keeps changing, I think this partnership is only going to become stronger and more diverse. It's definitely one to watch.
So we've covered a lot of ground today, from the history of India-Israel relations to those key areas where they're cooperating and some of the challenges they still face. We've even talked about those exciting opportunities for the future. But there's one more big piece of this puzzle that we need to talk about. It's really at the heart of understanding why this relationship is so important. You're talking about what it all means. For India's role in the Middle East, right? And its aspirations on the world stage. That's the big picture stuff. You got it. It's not just about breaking down defense deals or agricultural partnerships. It's about understanding what this relationship means. For India's place in the world, does it change the game for them? All right, welcome back to the deep dive. We've been trying to untangle this whole India-Israel relationship, tracing it all the way from those kind of hesitant beginnings to this, really dynamic partnership that they have today. But before we wrap things up, let's tackle this big question that's been kind of hanging in the air this whole time. What does this all mean for India's place in the world?
Yeah, we've got to zoom out a bit, right? Look at the bigger picture. How does this relationship actually impact India's role in the Middle East? And those global aspirations they have, does it really change things for them?
Exactly. We can analyze all the defense deals and agricultural partnerships, but what does it add up to, in terms of India's position globally?
That's the big question, isn't it? And there's no easy answer, really. It's one of those geopolitical puzzles with tons of moving parts. But I think one thing is clear. India's ties with Israel are definitely having a major impact on their ambitions, both in the region and on the world stage.
Okay, so let's start with the Middle East. I mean, it's a region known for its, let's just say it's a complicated place. Lots of tension, conflict, alliances that are constantly shifting. So how does India's relationship with Israel affect its ability to navigate all of that? Does it make things easier or harder for them?
Well, traditionally, India's tried to maintain a balanced approach in the Middle East, engaging with everyone, Israel, the different Arab nations. But as this relationship with Israel deepens, it definitely adds a new element for them to consider.
Some people argue that it might actually limit India's ability to act as a mediator, the Israel-Palestine conflict.
Yeah.
Especially given that some see India as being closer to Israel these days. Does that affect their neutrality?
That's a fair point. India's been supporting a two-state solution for a long time, and they have those historical ties with the Palestinian people. So that's given them some credibility, I think, as someone who could potentially help mediate. But as their relationship with Israel grows stronger, yeah, it's possible that some countries in the region might see them as being less impartial.
But then there's the other side of that argument, right? Some say that India's strong connections with both Israel and the Arab world could actually make them a more effective mediator, that they can use those relationships to kind of build bridges and encourage dialogue.
Yeah, that's another interesting perspective. It's worth pointing out that India's always emphasized its commitment to a peaceful resolution to the Israel-Palestine conflict, even as they're building those closer ties with Israel, and they're still engaging with Palestinian leaders and advocating for their goals. It's a nuanced approach, for sure.
So it's a delicate balancing act. And I guess we'll just have to wait and see how it all plays out in the long run. But even if we set aside the Israel-Palestine conflict for a moment, how does India's relationship with Israel affect their overall position in the Middle East?
Well, it definitely strengthens their strategic presence in the region. I mean, Israel's a valuable security partner, and their expertise in areas like counterterrorism and intelligence is really useful for India.
And we can't forget about the economic side of things either. Israel is very technologically advanced, and their economic ties with India are growing fast. That gives India access to new markets and technologies, which can really boost their own development.
Exactly. It's a win-win on that front. And as the Middle East keeps changing, all those power dynamics shifting, new alliances forming, having that strong relationship with Israel gives India a definite strategic edge.
Okay, so it seems like this India-Israel relationship is a pretty key factor as India tries to increase its influence in the Middle East. But what about the global implications? How does it affect India's ambitions to become a leading power on the world stage?
Well, Israel's a close ally of the United States, right? So as India gets closer to Israel, they're also getting closer to the U.S. And that alignment can be pretty beneficial for India in terms of diplomatic support, trade opportunities, and even access to technology.
But India is also really committed to that idea of strategic autonomy in its foreign policy, right? They don't want to be completely aligned with any one country or bloc. They want to be able to make their own decisions.
Okay.
Based on their own national interests?
Exactly. They want to chart their own course. And the relationship with Israel is just one part of that. I mean, India is actively engaging with countries all over the world, building partnerships based on shared interests. It's all about diversification.
So this India-Israel relationship it's complicated, it's multifaceted, and it has some pretty significant implications for India's aspirations, both regionally and globally. It's come a long way. And it's still evolving as both countries try to figure out, this constantly changing world we live in.
It's a dynamic story, and that's what makes it so interesting to watch.
Well said. And with that, I think we've reached the end of our deep dive into India-Israel relations. We've explored the history, the cooperation, the challenges, and those exciting possibilities for the future. We hope you enjoyed it.
We do, and we hope this deep dive has given you a better understanding of this really complex relationship, a relationship that will no doubt continue to shape global events for years to come.
If you enjoyed this episode, don't forget to like it and subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you don't miss out on any future deep dives. We'll be back soon with another fascinating topic to explore. Until then, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep diving deep.